Now, we will now talk about yet another technology, floating offshore wind energy, and the question where we are headed with this. To discuss this question, let me ask Gabi BEAUMONT-SMITH, Aymeric DUCROCQ, Ricardo ROCHA, David CARRASCOSA, and Hakim MOUSLIM to join me on stage. Hello, hi, how are you? Nice to meet you too. Hello, how are you? Yeah, wherever you want to sit. David, hola, ¿cómo estás? Bonjour, monsieur, hola, hallo. Is one missing? 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah, well. Monsieur DUCROCQ, hallo. Ah, il arrive. Bon. Eh bien, we're missing one person, but luckily, Monsieur DUCROCQ is not going to speak first, so we're going to start off with you, Gabi. Hello. Gabi, you're floating wind expert at TGS 4C Offshore Wind. Thank you for joining us here in France. And your company puts out what's called a market attractiveness framework for the floating offshore wind energy sector. It just so happens that the new edition, or the new version, is going to be published this week, right?
Yes. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Can you hold the microphone really close?
Oh, yes.
And you brought a few slides, right?
Yes, there should be a slide because, as you mentioned, we publish our Market Attractiveness Index every 6 months in the second and fourth quarter of our Global Market Overview Report, which our second quarters was published yesterday. And this is our latest edition, which, as you can see here, we always rank the UK first. I promise it's not a bias, though.
No nationalism here.
And France, though, is becoming a contender and has been moving up in the rankings because of some of the things that we've already discussed today with the indexation and the support during site investigations. The UK generally ranks at the top because it simply needs offshore wind and has a good history with floating more so than other markets. You'll also notice that generally our index focuses on Europe and then simply South Korea and Japan in the APAC regions.
Right. So talk us through some of the criteria you're taking into account. You're saying potential, ambition, etc.
Yeah. So we look at these 8 key floating wind markets, and then we score them across 9 factors that influence development. And those are potential, which in that we include our forecasts, ambition, which is simply looking at government targets, risk and stability, which looks at political uncertainty, whether there have been delays in the market, how open the market is, context, which looks at the importance of renewables and the substitutions, not just in renewables, but how substitutable is floating for bottom fixed. Then we look at context. Oh, sorry, that was context. Then we look at cost. We use our in-house CapEx model to look at what is the CapEx for a 2035 build. Then we look at what's been deployed. We use our database to compile that. And then the same for the pipeline is based on our database. And then regulatory and policy support is based on grid investment, offtake attractiveness, and the maturity of the regulatory framework. And then finally, we look at supply chain and infrastructure, which looks at whether there's a clear presence with manufacturing, vessels, labor to support full-scale deployment of floating. And that's a big mixture of qualitative and quantitative scores. We try to, quantify it so that it can add up to a score out of 100, and we prorate the factors so that the country with the highest score will get the maximum number of points. We can, of course, debate how each factor is weighted, and if we change those weightings, obviously we would get different scores, but we believe that this is a comprehensive framework based on objective factors, and it allows us to compare the markets for its strengths and weaknesses.
Are there any surprises this time around? Newcomers or new criteria? I think you're taking into account new criteria, right?
Yes, so we did add 2 new criteria in this edition, which was risk and stability and cost. I think obviously we've talked today about some of the geopolitics and how much political uncertainty is affecting the sector. So we've added that in, and then we also add in cost, which was always taken into account, but I wanted it to be included as something quite explicit. So that has also resulted in changing some of the weightings of the other factors. And this isn't technically a new criteria, but we did take out 2 markets from the index this edition. We took out the United States, which I think is quite self-explanatory. And then we also took out Greece, simply because we think there's a lot of potential in Greece, but there just needs to be a bit more development in the market for it to really be valuable to put into the index.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Certainly a very interesting index also for you, Aymeric DUCROCQ. Thank you for joining us. Is that right?
Yeah, thank you. Apologies for being late. I'm much slower these days than
yes, I can see that. That's all right. Thank you for joining us nevertheless. You are Executive Vice President, Renewable Marine Energies France at EDF Power Solutions, which was formerly called EDF Renewables.
Yep.
And so talking about France, you recently commissioned one of France's first floating offshore wind pilot farms, the 24-megawatt project Provence Grand Large,
yes,
in the Mediterranean Sea. Can you tell us a bit more how things went? What are the lessons learned during the development phase of the project so far?
Yes, it was a pleasure. Actually, this is very timely. We commissioned it a couple of weeks ago, so just in time for this event.
Great.
And that's a great achievement by the team. It's the very first pilot project in the Mediterranean, and indeed, I think it gave lessons across the board, frankly. Every scope of what it takes to develop such a project, from environmental studies to design and technology issues, in particular related to the articulation between the floater and the turbine. But also, I think a great deal of learning came from the integration scope, what happens at the harbor, because the integration operations are very demanding from a logistics standpoint. It takes a lot of collaboration with the port, so we did that in the port of Marseille-Fos, and the collaboration with them was outstanding. But in terms of the infrastructures there, the resistance of the docks, the space, the coactivity management as well, that was really a very huge achievement from us, but also from the local stakeholders, in particular the port authorities. So yes, it delivered a great deal of learning, and I think it will help us a lot to move on to the next scale, which is the commercial scale floating projects, and in particular the one we got awarded at the end of last year in the framework of the so-called AO6.
This is a video of the project, right?
This is the video of Provence Grand Large, yes.
Yeah.
It looks terrific.
And is there anything, talking about lessons learned, is there anything that in upcoming projects, you're going to develop other floating offshore wind energy projects, that you're going to do differently from what you did there?
Yes, I mean, the scale will be different, obviously, from a 25-megawatt project such as Provence Grand Large to a 250 or more, such as the recently awarded projects. So scale will bring a lot of differences, in particular in terms of floaters manufacturing. How can we industrialize this as much as we can, standardize the process, But I think the core learnings will certainly apply to the next phase.
Talking about markets, different floating offshore wind markets, France is your favorite market, you told me in advance of this conference. Why is that so, apart from being French, obviously?
Yeah, it's not big news coming from EDF, I guess. But indeed, jokes apart, I think the French market has strong fundamentals. If you think of market design and off-tech characteristics, I think it's properly structured because the off-tech contract, the double-sided CFD, for a very long term, gives visibility and predictability to revenue, so that helps a lot to develop and finance the project. The very content of that contract is also well thought through, in my opinion, in terms of risk allocation between the state and the operator. If you think of protection against interest rates movements, also protection against negative price episodes that are becoming more and more frequent in Europe in general. So the quality of the offtake is very good. That's a strong point. Also, we see the state moving in the right direction in terms of scaling the tenders. In the past, it was one project after the other, and we have seen recently that they do organize tenders that offer a couple or more of sites, so potentially you can save time, cost, optimize the process. This is very the case with the ongoing AO9, for instance. So that's an improvement in my opinion. And obviously, we now have also a mature supply chain in France with contractors established, having track record, industrial plants that were all developed at the time of probably 13 years ago, at the time of the very first tenders, but now they are there and they support the market. So yes, this all makes the French market quite attractive in my opinion, and we should definitely preserve this design to support the deployment and the roadmap that the government is pushing for.
And is there still leeway for improvement when it comes to France? Anything that France needs to improve when it comes to floating offshore wind?
Yes, certainly. I mean, nothing is perfect, and there is still room for improvement. I think the timeline of tenders is still pretty slow. I mean, for the cahier des charges or the tender specifications to get final, and it takes a lot of time. It's not always on time, so there is some progress to make there. Thereafter, in the development phase as such, in terms of getting the authorizations, I think we could also streamline the process and save time. Obviously, there are judicial challenges, and that's normal. I mean, anyone is legitimate to challenge a project. But if we could have a limited time frame for the court decisions to take place, that could be also an improvement. And last but not least, I think we have a strong asset in France, which are the harbors. I mean, we have a number of solid, financially, but also industrially solid harbors. But they still need to invest further to support, in particular, when you think of floating, if you think of the areas that will be required. There is a need for investment, and I think port authorities will need support from the state to get there, and I think this is the strongest priority, in my opinion, to further reinforce the France as a market.
Investments in harbors is also something that we're going to discuss a bit later on this afternoon in another session. What other markets are you looking at apart from France?
Well, we are present in other European countries, such as the UK, obviously, but also Belgium. We are developing in Germany, but also in Asia. And there are countries in Asia where floating wind will find its legitimate place in the mix, I believe. If you think, of fundamental characteristics like load demand, limited space, and industrial capacities, also supply chain. And depth of financial markets, that's another feature that matters. I mean, you need to be able to raise debt in local currency, so it's not something that you should neglect. All these features, you can find them in several Asian countries like Japan, Korea, or Taiwan. And these are markets we are currently exploring, and we hope we can find good opportunities there as well.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that topic as well tomorrow morning with one of your colleagues. Don't miss out on that, by the way. Get up early. And I wanted to ask you, if you took a step back from France and other markets, for you, what are the main criteria for a market to be successful when it comes to floating offshore wind energy?
Well, like I just alluded to, I think it takes a few things. First, the right market design. So hopefully quality of uptake. Hopefully, I mean, it's better, I think, if you don't have to pay a very expensive lease to start with. So that's, by the way, a strong feature of the French market. And that helps developers take those risks. Then you critically depend on a solid supply chain. And as I said, financial markets there, being liquid and deep to support the financing, is also a critical element.
Thank you very much. So France is something that you are also looking at. Ricardo ROCHA, you are Offshore Wind Technical Director at Baywa Renewable Energies Global, and you also have projects in the UK and Italy, I understand, right? Talk us through.
So first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. I hope you can hear me. Yes, definitely France is a very dear market to us. And again, I reiterate Aymeric's words. I think stability is key. I will not stay too much on France because Aymeric already told it all. We are also looking at Italy. It's an important market for us besides the UK, where we are also present. But again, the UK has the expensive leases, although in the floating wind in particular, there was a measure that limited that capacity to somehow over-evaluate the seabed lease because there was a cap on ScotWind in particular. But still, you have a lease, you have a development, and then you have to go for your CFD. Of course, France has the limitation of the long direction of the development, so indeed it takes a lot of time to get the projects up and running from the early development phase. What Italy introduces here is that speediness, because as it is based on greenfield development, the developers are able to somehow tailor and develop their own projects and then submit them to application. And if the projects are viable, then they can proceed to the next phase, which would be the CFD auction. So it is a different market from France. Probably it doesn't give so much stability or so much predictability. However, it has this component where, you know, the state doesn't replace the developer and does the development of the project. Is the developer taking that risk and actually taking the lead and implementing the development at his own pace. Yeah.
What are the other stumbling blocks in Italy? What are the other difficulties in that market?
Well, it is less regulated, right? So in France, for example, in the UK, the zones, the lease zones, the seabed area is defined by the state. It is discussed with the stakeholders, and of course, that part of the de-risking is already done when you apply to the project. In Italy, the developer has to do that by himself, and in some cases, he is conflicting with other developers. So there is a parallel dialogue that needs to be kept between the interested parties if there's a zone where there's a conflict. But I believe that it is resolvable because in theory you would have the whole maritime space to somehow develop your project.
You have 9 gigawatts under development there, right? When is the first floating offshore wind turbine going to hit the water?
We are hoping to be able to deliver it by the end of the decade. So, of course, not all these 9 gigawatts are at the same level of development. So we have projects which are more advanced than others. But, of course, there's a CFD that has been indicated and a potential date, and we believe that this is still possible to deliver before the end of the decade.
Do you think that Italy's market model is the market model of the future then, or where are we converging towards?
I'm not sure if I'm able to answer that question. Of course, what we do is to diversify our risk to make sure that at least we have different market models to play with. But what does seem to us is that you can be faster to reach the construction in a market like Italy than probably in a market like France, where, as Aymeric said, things take a little bit longer. But of course, they can be improved. If they are improved, then all the criteria are there.
And if we take a step back and look at the supply chain, do you think that each of these countries, and specifically France and Italy, will they set up their own supply chain, or are there synergy effects that can be found?
Similar to what happened with fixed bottom 20 years ago, the supply chain will have to be developed. And of course, the more flexibility you have to develop the technology based on the project characteristics and on the supply chain that it is available, the faster you will develop that supply chain. Of course, supply chain is not static. We have seen the European supply chain move to Asia, move to Europe to deliver projects, and still manage to grow with its base market. That happens with predictability, with real projects. It doesn't happen with promises of dozens of megawatts. So we need the projects to start running so that the supply chain can develop, can do the investments that are required to be in a position to deliver these projects. So I don't think that it will be static. I believe that this supply chain will migrate where the projects are.
Just briefly, you were also talking about political stability. That's obviously a topic in Italy where governments can change quite quickly. To what extent has it, over the past years and decades, had an impact on this sector?
Well, our reading is that despite the fact that there has been changes, especially on political beliefs, the pathway to for offshore wind in particular has kept constant, and of course we have been seeing the state taking the measures to make sure that these projects are becoming a reality. So I don't think that has affected directly in the case of Italy, but we have seen what happened in the US and other markets where that has been a complete driver for the sunk of the industry. Yeah.
Okay, so good news coming up in Italy.
Oh, yes, hopefully.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're now going to move a bit further west to España, Spain, with you, David. Hello.
Hello. Hello. Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you for coming. You're COO at Spanish floating platform manufacturer Saitec. Your company has been testing a 2-megawatt demonstrator called DEMOSAT at Spanish test center BMAP off the Basque country in northern Spain for about 2 years now. Can you tell, and you brought a video, I think, right?
Yeah.
Can we see the video, maybe? Can you tell us about the project and what lessons have been learned during that development?
Well, it's
Can you hold the microphone really close? Sorry.
Yeah. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay. So this DEMOSAT project is a project that reached final investment decision on February 2020. We all know what happened on March 2020. So started harsh. So the first challenges of the projects were outer challenges through the pandemic, all the supply chain problems that we had. But through that, we also learned that concrete was also a good choice of material for the floater. Not only because of the local content, but also because of the low fluctuation in terms of cost. We always say that if the project would have been built in steel, we would probably have not been able to make it with the budget we had, right? Through this pandemic. It's a 2 megawatt unit that we deployed in September 2023 in Baywa. It's as you said, it's basically 2 miles away from the Basque coast. And it's actually delivering energy to the grid as the first floating offshore wind project to do that in Spain. And I would say that we've learned quite a lot here. We had all the challenges linked to the role we were taking in the project, which was being the full EPC, the developer. It was kind of a 360-degree role that we had in the project, and managing interfaces is probably one of the toughest things we've been learning from. And on the, let's say, the great learnings so far for the almost 2 years of operation, the turbine has not had to stop at any point due to any effect from the platform. So any kind of stops from the turbine have been for maintenance or due to the wind raising the 25 meters per second mark, but none from the platform perspective.
Any surprises during these 2 past years that you want to reveal?
Sorry?
Surprises? Any particular episodes where you had to solve a technical problem that you've overcome?
Yeah, well, there's been several. I remember with let's say specific passion the point where we, let's say, moved the first sections of the floater up in the air to be positioned in the assembly station, where after the whole floater was assembled. Then also with the installation of the turbine, we did the whole installation of the tower and turbine while the platform was still onshore. So that was also another challenge, and we had some windy episodes there. So it was interesting. And then obviously the float off. It's a concrete floater. So yeah, we have like decades of experience in how steel behaves, how accurate the density of steel is, but concrete is a bit of a different material, right? You are more on the statistical domain. So then when you have this float off and you realize that the platform floats exactly at the point where it has to float, it's a very, very interesting moment, I would say.
A lot of relief then, in that case. You also have a number of other projects in the pipeline in Spanish waters. Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, we are working on our own developments. So we believe that like this 2 megawatt demonstration is a good milestone, but definitely we need to step into something like Aymeric was telling us about. Provence Grand Large is a good example of what a next step could be for our technology. We are looking into Spain as a potential location for this deployment of pre-commercial projects. One pre-commercial project called Gabriella on the north of Spain. Another, it's called MedFloat, and that one is located in the northeast part, close to the area of Barcelona. But we are also looking into other regions, as we know that the framework in Spain is taking longer to develop. Also, the attractiveness of the Spanish market is going down. I would say, unfortunately, at this point, and hopefully we reaccelerate in the short term. So we are also looking into Asia. We are also obviously involved into, let's say, being potentially the providers for commercial projects that are now either in tender phase or have been awarded. So yeah, looking into not putting all the eggs in the same basket.
Gabby, would you agree with that the attractiveness of Spain is going down? Have you seen that in your index?
Yeah, it's interesting. Spain in the rankings was one that surprised me a bit because it was higher than I thought it would be, but actually I think where it's placed, which is just above Norway and South Korea, actually I think it's neck and neck with Norway, I think is appropriate. As you mentioned, Spain has delayed its framework. They still need to introduce a ministerial order outlining the auction conditions, and then there needs to be a public consultation, and then there needs to be another ministerial order actually launching the auction. And all of this was already supposed to have happened, and we don't really have any news as to when it will happen, but I would say Norway is sort of equally uncertain, despite the fact that they've recently launched their floating tender at Sierra Nord, because they're going to be using an investment support scheme instead of a, tariff scheme, which introduces a lot of uncertainty in that market. And then with South Korea, they awarded a project last year, which was very exciting, but they're yet to sign their offtake agreement. So there's a lot of uncertainty in those three markets together, and so they've kind of bundled in the middle, and so I think that's an appropriate place for them to be. But I will say I'm a bit optimistic when it comes to Spain.
No, I'm not that pessimistic, or not completely pessimistic, but it's true that we saw great alliances between national utility companies and international companies that has been kind of somehow that was a very strong message in the past, and then that's been dropping, right? The interest, also the teams that were being put together in Spain for the development of these projects. Obviously the biggest concern is about the political action, right? Which, I mean, we have the supply chain in Spain, we have the sites identified, we have the marine spatial planning, we have the conditions, the wind resource in several key spots, but we lack for political action at the moment.
What would you say, David, when you took a step back from Spain, what are the main factors for you for a floating offshore wind energy market to attract your interest, to believe in it?
Yeah, I think that Aymeric already pointed out some key points. I would also add, add on the infrastructure topic. I think the capability of delivering platforms in a great number is not something you can do with any kind of infrastructure. Let's not forget that a 15 megawatt turbine would be of the height of the Tour Eiffel, and the layout or the footprint of that platform would be probably a football pitch, right? And we are being asked to deliver one football pitch with the height of a Tour Eiffel per week or each 2 weeks, let's say, in the medium term, and that's not something you can do in every scenario, right? You need 20 to 30 hectares available in a port to be able to deploy this number of units, and besides any other all the other key elements of the topic, we believed, and that's in our strategy to say, okay, we may have a technology that has been maturing for years. We may have great partners, but if we don't have the deliverability of the platforms, we have nothing, and that's why we are now focusing our strategy on securing areas in ports, and that's the case with the port of A Coruña and the port of Castellón, looking not only to deliver platforms for Spain and Portugal, but also to nearby markets, because we believe on construction hubs. We don't believe on single projects, single ports per single project, right? If we want to have these investments not causing a great impact into the projects, we need to repay the investment into ports, into several projects in several countries, and that's what we honestly think should be the case, as it's been the case for fixed bottom.
So, Ricardo, ROCHA, and Aymeric DUCROCQ, can I just ask you, both of you, are you interested in the Spanish market? Is that something that you're looking at or not really? A country you're looking at?
Yes, we are. I would say, scouting it. So we have a team there which is active in different fields. But offshore wind is definitely a potential area for expansion for us in Spain. So we are monitoring this quite closely. Hopefully, this will get done by the government, and then the market can be started off. So we are patiently waiting and getting ready to get into this market at some point.
Waiting for things to happen. Yeah. What about you?
Well, we have a presence in the market. We have offices in Spain. We have onshore and solar, onshore wind and solar business in Spain. We'll have to see what comes out of the regulation. If we believe that it's something where we can add value, and we'll look at it. Yes.
Right. So you're
at the moment we don't know.
Yeah, you're not quite convinced just yet. Hakim, hello, bonjour, hello. Let's see if you agree with. Yeah, it's working.
Yeah, it's working.
Hello.
Hi.
Let's see if you agree with this, with all this. You're Regional Director Europe at UK consultancy OWC. Which are the countries you would award 5 stars to?
Yeah, thank you for having me. First, I think I'm going to repeat myself pretty much because I'm the last to speak. But
very close, please.
Okay, closer. In terms of the countries, we talked about Europe as leading the market in offshore floating wind mainly. Of course, France provides us with all the characteristics of a good market, as Aymeric said, with a good offtake conditions. And the target towards 3 gigawatts in 2030 in the pipeline for floating wind, with AO5 awarded, AO6 awarded as well, and AO9 ongoing, initially 4 sites with various facades, maritime facades as well. So France is definitely offering a great market, especially stability, both politically and as well in terms of financial conditions and the stability of pricing with special CFD conditions that have been built by the government in those tenders. Then if you look at the second most mature market in Europe, it's going to be the UK, and here's where I agree with you. Definitely UK has launched several leasing rounds that have been awarded also, with some certain difficulties that Ricardo mentioned about the leasing costs, and still that market is aiming at 5 gigawatts of floating wind in 2030, and it's a set target, and it's going forward. If we look now at the second-tier countries in Europe, I would say definitely I'd mention Portugal first. Portugal has a 10-gigawatt target in 2030, but the conditions are not still there, especially some political turmoil happened this year as well. But we're looking for a 2-round tender opening in October, maybe later this year, hopefully.
Another round of elections happened.
Yeah, exactly. So Portugal is a good market by its technical conditions as well, both by the variability of sites that are available for floating wind. I think WindFloat Atlantic as well, being installed there as a pilot farm that has been running in front of Viana do Castelo. We have got plenty of good characteristics for Portugal to be a next also promising market. Then if we look at the second country in this tier 2 countries, I would say Italy is bringing as well a very set target, but still there are some regulatory and planning issues to be solved before we go ahead, and probably Spain after, where we wish that it could resolve and develop faster, because there's for sure again 2 maritime facades, Mediterranean and the Atlantic Ocean, with a supply chain that is great in Spain, that is ready for floating wind, and that is completely going to help floating wind at a European level, not only for Spain, but Spanish market is interesting for that as the support. Besides Europe, I still think the United States, even if what Trump did and that what happened, still had some promising targets. We had 15 gigawatts of floating wind targeted. We had some federal state targets and plans in California, for example, in other states that were launched, yet paused right now. But that can change, that will change hopefully in the future. So we will see gaining interest. But for the moment, I think Asia Pacific is definitely booming in terms of offshore wind. And the difficulty for European developers or European players is what can they do in Asia? Because the supply chain is mainly present there. If you look at China, it's a great market, but it's self-sufficient. The supply chain is dominant. Developers are kind of blocked to entry to the market. It's a government-based market. And then South Korea and Japan could be potential short-term markets with set targets. 2030, if I remember, Japan is 10 gigawatts, and 2040, it's up to 30 gigawatts. So there's definitely a plan for offshore wind in Japan and South Korea. And there are other countries to come, like Taiwan, Vietnam, and others that could also be the next stage for floating wind.
Thank you for that little tour around the world. So yeah, we're going to talk about what Asia can actually offer to international market participants tomorrow morning at, I think, 9:30. Get up early. Can I ask you about technology? There are different technologies in the market. What's your take on this? Will we see one or two technologies making the race, or will a lot of different versions of floaters continue to exist in this market?
So we were discussing this earlier. There are more than 100 patents or technologies available to developers today. I think my answer to it as technical advisor, again, it's technology variety is great, brings a lot of innovation, pushes us to solve certain issues and to make future projects bankable. Yet the best technology at the moment is the technology that the lenders will believe in and that the financial risk will be taken for. So my take on it for technology at the moment in floating wind, the best technology is the technology where the developer is going to be able to find a great relationship between a technology and an EPC or EPCI company, because those risks are major for this market, which is in its early stages of development. We are not as mature as the bottom fixed market. There's still a road to make, and I think that the best technology at the moment is technology where there is a kind of technology endorsement by the manufacturer, or there's a very close relationship between the manufacturer and the technology owner, if there's a technology owner, or an unlicensed technology. Because what we have seen as well recently is that there's a lot of convergence towards specific technologies or specific type of floaters for a certain site around semi-subs, for example, 3-column semi-subs. I'm just taking an example here, not to mention that we have great technologies elsewhere. But for a typical semi-sub, you can then adapt it. If you have the right component to build it, you can adapt it with the right supply chain locally. And that is very important, as Aymeric was mentioning, because that creates the market and creates the risk opportunity for lenders to bring in the money and to fund the project.
So to come back to the question, do you think there will be one or two technologies that will continue to exist, or will there be a variety?
I think technologies is too, we're shrinking too much the word if we say one technology. We're probably seeing families or types of technologies. We'll see that, but definitely there will be convergence in the future. And again, it's up to each market to see the supply chain, what it's able to take.
Ricardo, you talked about that in advance of the conference when we were talking on the phone. You said that you believe that there will indeed be a number of different floaters that will continue to exist in the market, if I understood that right, and they will be adapted to each project, right?
Well, we think that this diversity that has been mentioned has actually been a stone on the path of the development of large-scale floating wind. Again, if we look at the example of fixed bottom, it started with gravity-based foundations, and then suddenly they found out in the oil and gas technology a solution, which is the monopile. And of course, there were some fabricators that could deliver monopiles. There were some T&I contractors that could install monopiles. And then suddenly, monopile became, after 20 years, the dominant technology in fixed bottom. I wonder if someone had patented the monopile 20 years ago, what would be of our industry, if we would have an industry. So what I think really is that this intention of technology providers to somehow make their technology be the dominant technology and to deliver to several projects is actually a bottleneck for the industry, in my view. So what I believe that is going to happen is that the technologies will start to be tailored, and we are talking about groups of technologies, as Hakim stated, semi-subs, whatever, and they will start to be tailored specifically for the projects by the developers, which are the ones on the driving seat. The developers know what they need for the project. They know what are the requirements that they need to fulfill, and they know which technologies are able to help them deliver these requirements. And therefore, what I believe is going to happen is that we will have some kind of a monopile of floating. Whatever that is, I cannot say, but I think the market should develop in that way. Yeah.
Would you agree with that, Hakim? Or Aymeric?
Yeah, absolutely. I fully share the view. I think we should not forget that floating wind still has to become more competitive. I mean, there's still a big gap versus fixed bottom. So floating wind will have to, decrease costs, and that requires scale, and that requires, to some extent, a kind of standardization or at least streamlining in terms of, technology areas and options. So this will go down for sure. I don't know which technology will prevail ultimately. What is the next monopile? I don't know. But yes, we will certainly see less diversity in terms of offers, and that will be necessary to move towards standardization and cost savings.
David?
Yeah, if I may, I understand. Yeah. So I agree with the fact that there will be a reduction on the number of available technologies. What I believe myself is that if we want to reach the targets, we'll see if it's the targets that Hakim mentioned or any lower target. We would need to activate two supply chains. One is the steel supply chain, the other is the concrete supply chain. And that will allow the floating offshore wind market to happen. Otherwise, with only one of these supply chains, it might be not enough.
So in any case, fascinating and interesting days ahead. Thank you very much, everybody, for participating. Thank you, Gabi BEAUMONT-SMITH. Thank you, Aymeric DUCROCQ. Thank you, Ricardo ROCHA. Thank you, David CARRASCOSA.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hakim,
Thank you,
MOUSLIM.
Thank you for the moderation.
Thank you. Thank you for listening.